This was said on Thursday. It was purported to be said by the Buddha, life is suffering. And if we dare to delve into the nature of suffering, and to do so, we have to traverse our own, because the doorway to understanding is empathy. We have the possibility of learning one of the most sublime mysteries, one of the greatest and profoundest of the laws of life. Let's see if this story can evoke in us what it is that's needed to bring us to awareness of this great and fundamental law. In a time not so long ago, there was a Hasidic rabbi who was renowned through all of Eastern Europe. He was known as Reb Zalman. And Reb Zalman had amongst his followers 2 Hasidim, and they were both called Kivol. One was called Kivol the Dark because he had a black beard, and the other was called Kivol the Light because his beard was white. But the 2 Kivols went on a journey, and during the course of their journey, it came to the eve of the Sabbath day. So the requirement for preparation for this great day is to immerse oneself in a ritual bath and undertake the prayers necessary to welcome in the Sabbath day. So Kivol the Dark had noticed that on their route they had passed a small spring. So they decided that they would backtrack a little and go to this spring to take their ritual bath and say their prayers and undertake those other rites that would fulfill the requirements to welcome in the Sabbath day. They sat beside the spring, which was bubbling forth from rocks, and they placed their prayer shawls over their heads and were about to pray, when suddenly they heard the wailing sound of a soft and gentle sobbing, which touched their hearts so deeply that they were afraid and wanted to jump up from that place and run away. But instead of doing so, they placed their talus over their head and went deep into prayer. And as they prayed, the quiet sobbing ceased. But then it was time to take the bath. And Kivol the Dark, with great trepidation, disrobed and entered into the spring. But as he did so, a wave of grief so great took over him that he began to sob. And when Kivol the Light, who was waiting on the bank, looked at him, begging him, what is it? The weeping was so overwhelming for him, he was not even able to reply. But when he came out, he was able to express to Kivol the Light that he had never, in all his life, felt such sorrow. Kivol the Light was very reluctant to enter into that place. But Kivol the Dark said, please, go, bathe yourself, confirm what it is that I've experienced. So Kivol the Light, with great reluctance, entered into the spring, and he too, immediately, before even immersing himself in the water of the spring, was overcome with a grief so great that he thought his heart was going to burst. And as quickly as he could, he came out of that water. They hurriedly dressed themselves and went on their way, carrying with them the weight of this sadness still in the depths of their beings. They came to an inn, and during the course of the evening, they spoke to the innkeeper, and the innkeeper apologized. "Oh, I'm so sorry. This is so painful to us that we keep it blocked out of ourselves." I could have told you the story. There was a maiden who, before her hour of joy, was taken by the Cossacks and treated most inhumanely, and her blood flowed, and she died there. And this is where this spring came forth. Now, both the Kivos, after they'd completed their journey and returned to their home village, they spoke to their Rabbi Zalman, and when they told him the story of their grief, what they'd experienced in this spring, he too wept with them, because the grief was around them like an aura, filling them. Before the next Sabbath day, Rabbi Zalman called the two Feibles to him and said, "We are going to return to this spring." Now, the two Feibles knew that Reb Zalman was not only in contact with, embracing all those material things of life, but was also in touch with and embracing of those things that were immaterial, spirit, so-called. So even though there was a reluctance in their hearts, of course they undertook what it was that their rabbi had asked of them, and they made their way to the spring. As they sat, the three of them, putting their prayer shawls over their heads and beginning the prayer, again the quiet sobbing began. And whilst the two Feibles, now having immersed in that spring and knowing and being imbued with that grief, they too began to sob and cry, the tears streaming down their face. But Rabbi Zalman remained in a state of prayer. And in that state of prayer, he called on the Spirit, and there was a soft murmuring, and the Spirit of this young being spoke her name. Rabbi Zalman invited her to tell her story, and the story that she told was so heartrending to all three that they too were taken to the depths of suffering. But the young being related that although the spring had come forth from her, that which filled the spring with its sadness was the grief of all those who had passed in a state of suffering. The two five-year-olds were so moved they continued their weeping, but Reb Zalman remained in his state of prayer, and he asked, How can this spring be purified? And the young being spoke and said, if a pure man who has died can be immersed into this spring, the spring will be renewed and cleansed. This is what Reb Zalman was waiting for. So they completed their prayers, removed their prayer shawls, and made their way back to their own synagogue. The next year, there was a young Hasidim who was about to pass from life. But he was so attached to the teachings of the Torah that he had not tasted his hour of joy. He had never married, and he voiced quite openly that he was reluctant to leave this life because he had not tasted this joy. So Reb Zalman came to him and said, your hour of joy is not yet lost. How? How? Said the Hasid. And Reb Zalman related the story of the young girl and the spring. So the young Hasidim begged all those that were gathered around him, please, please, let this be my ritual bath. When I die, take me to this spring. And this is what they did. On his passing, they carried him to this pool where the spring emanated, and they bathed his body in the waters. All those who were present heard a sigh which resounded throughout all of the earth and all of the heavens of all those who had suffered and bled. That spring is still alive and used by those who seek to move into that moment, which is said to be that hour of joy. The young men and young women who are about to be married, which of course is symbolic in many, many ways for our spiritual life. Even today, there are those who bathe in this spring. If we look at the deep meanings of this story, if we dare, if we truly dare to traverse our own suffering, it brings us to the door of empathy. We can enter into this mystery, and we can know this truth as stated by the Buddha. Life is suffering. But the Buddha also said, suffering is bliss. But we cannot. If we look at it as this hour of joy, the bliss being our hour of joy, we cannot taste this until we embrace this law, this mystery, this truth.